Hey everyone, hi. It's been a minute since I filmed because I have been kind of sick. The household is dealing with sickness, and I am part of this household, and I'm also dealing with sickness. And so it's been a minute since I've talked to you all, and I've missed it. And I've also been doing a challenge, a 30 books in 30 days challenge. And this is an update on that project. But since it's been a hot minute since I've sat down and talked to you all, I have kind of a backlog of books. So today is September 13th. And so far I have read 13 books, in these 13 days. I'm doing this as a challenge to myself to read more books, to pick up books I maybe normally wouldn't pick up, to get through my short books. And I went through all of this spiel without introducing myself. So if you were new here, then hi, I'm Shelly, and I really love books and reading. And right now, I'm working my way through a small project in September where I am trying to read 30 books in 30 days. And actually, if any of you are interested in more of like a real-time update on this project, I'm updating it on my Instagram stories, and I've saved all of the books that I've finished to a highlight reel on that Instagram stories. So if you're interested in more like real-timey stuff, then there's that. Okay, so since I have a backlog of books, I thought I would go through all of the lads, all of the men that I've read recently, because as of yesterday when I finished my 12th book or 13th book, I had 6 dudes that I had read, 6 books by dudes and then 6 books by women, or lasses, or ladies. And so I thought I would just kind of split it by anatomy. And so here are the guys that I've read. Okay, so I'm actually going to start off with, I don't know. So interestingly, with this group of lads, I have 2 poetry books, 2 art books, and then 2 short novels. And I'm going to talk about them in that order. And actually, of the 2 of the pairings, there was often one that worked really well, and then there was one that didn't, besides the novels. Both the novels really worked for me quite well. So I'm going to be working kind of my way up to the books that worked the best for me. But yeah, anyways, and I'm starting off with the ones that I actually didn't like first. So the first book I read that I actually quite disliked, and I thought I would like it, but I just didn't, and that is Vuong's Time is a Mother. Vuong is a Vietnamese American born in Vietnam to Vietnamese parents and moved to the US and is now a critically acclaimed poet. This is his second poetry collection in which he is exploring his childhood and his relationship with his mother. And I thought the themes were really intriguing. He talks about childhood as a cage needing to be broken through. I thought one particular poem worked incredibly well, and it was a list of what was bought on Amazon per month. And through that list, you can see the continuation of his mother's sickness and her getting more and more sick, and you can just see that through the items that was purchased on Amazon. I thought that was a very clever poem. But besides that, I didn't like this, and I think it had to do with the sincerity of the author. I don't know if this is like the B-side to Vuong's first very critically acclaimed and well-received poetry collection, but that's what it felt like. It felt a little bit like it was missing the mark. And also I will say that I recently read, actually I have it here, I recently read Sharon Old's Stag Sleep, and I felt like this was dripping with honesty. I felt like every word in every poem, she was confessing the depths and inner dusty corners of her heart and getting them on the page. And so compared to, unfortunately for Vuong, I had just read Stag Sleep. And so I get to Vuong's work and I'm just like, this is really lackluster and kind of boring, and it didn't do hardly anything for me. So if this poetry collection worked out better for you, I would love to know. So since I didn't like Ocean Vuong's second poetry collection, I decided to go back and start with his first poetry collection, which is called, and I read it on my iPad, so I'll put up a picture over yonder, and it's called Night Sky with Exit Wounds. So unlike Time as a Mother, the first poetry collection, which the Time as a Mother, Ocean Vuong is exploring his relationship with his mother, and in contrast, the first poetry collection, Night Sky with Exit Wounds, he is more thinking about his sexuality coming into his own and his relationship with his father, which is very complicated and convoluted. And this poetry collection worked out better for me because I felt like when I was reading it, the author, Vuong, was being more sincere, and the word choice seemed to be a lot more precise. He was more articulate. The themes had more of a punch to them, and there were quite a few more poems and imagery that definitely stood out in my mind in that collection versus Time as a Mother. So if you want to know where to start with Ocean Vuong's poetry, I would say definitely start with Night Sky with Exit Wounds, and then if that really worked out for you, kind of reset your expectations. That's at least what I would do, and then read Time as a Mother. And yeah, again, I would love to hear if you've read any of Ocean Vuong's work, what you thought of it. All right, my next two books are art books. The first book I'm going to talk about actually did something that I don't normally do, and I visited the library, which that's normal. I visit the library all the time, but I specifically found their graphic novels section, and I went through the whole section book by book, because a lot of times with graphic novels, the art has to appeal to me in some way. And so I was just looking through, trying to find some graphic novels in which their art really appealed to me, and I browsed the entire section, meaning I pulled out every single book on the shelf and I just kind of looked at it and then placed it back. Yeah, and hopefully I didn't get any books out of order. That's always an anxiety of mine. But anyways, through that process, I found this book and a couple of others. But I found The Wanderer by Peter Van Den M. The Wanderer is a wordless picture book, definitely for adults or for an older audience. And it is a fantastical story that follows visually through this really magical world, this little paper boat, and this little boat goes on quite the adventure. I liked it. There were some things that worked and there were some things that didn't work. I really thought the world that Peter Van Den M was able to create was really cool. I mean, visually, it was such a stunning book. However, I've read a lot of wordless picture books, and some of them have stronger storylines than others, and this was one of the others. This was kind of had a weak storyline, but man, the art was really, really cool, and I'm really glad that I was able to experience this book. The second book I read was a reread, and it is called Here, and it's by Richard Maguire. I actually did a whole visual review, a single book review on this, so if you want to know more about this book and the particulars of it, I'm going to actually point you to that review. But the idea of this book is that you as the reader, or me, the reader, is standing in the same spot the entire book. So the reader is looking out on a very specific spot, and over time that spot changes. And through that, Richard Maguire was able to tell a story, and that was really cool. Again, this is a reread for me. It's a book that I bought my husband. He actually found out about it and bought it for his friend, but I was like, I want to experience that book, so what did I do? I bought this for him, and then I read it. Weirdly, after I filmed that review and after I read this book, and put it up and everything, I found out that this is possibly going to be turned into a movie with Tom Hanks in it, and it's going to be directed by Zemeckis, who this is the team that did, I think, Forrest Gump and recently did Pinocchio. So yeah, so I was like, wow, I would be surprised. I was kind of surprised to see that this might turn into a movie. There is a storyline, but it's really more about the creativity of Richard Maguire and sort of the off-the-railsness of this book. This book definitely goes off the rails. It's very surprising and a delightful reread for me. Okay, so now we're finally at the books that really worked for me. And I'm going to talk about the book that worked really, really well, but I never, ever really want to pick up a book by this author again for good reason. And that is The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. Funnily, this was on my very first TBR that I ever, to be read video that I ever filmed ever, which was my first YouTube video ever, and then I didn't get to it. And so then I went on to film Why Haven't I Read These Books Yet? And this book was on it. And the reason why I hadn't read this is because I had read The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, which though it was a very engaging and captivating read and so many images conjured from that book stick with me now today, it was a brutal read. It was brutal and it gave me nightmares for the entire week that it took me to read that book, and some of the very particular details in the book definitely make my stomach clench in discomfort and in like sourness. So having that experience with Colson Whitehead, I really didn't want to pick up anything else by him, but I have an affinity for Pulitzer Prize winning novels. This is a Pulitzer Prize winning novel and I own this. And so I wanted to get it at some point. I wanted to read it at some point, but because of all the aforementioned reasons, I just hadn't. So what happened was that Kristin from Enter the Book, she kindly said, why don't we read this together? And I was all for that. So her and I read this together, and I'm happy to report that I really enjoyed this. So this is a story of friendship, essentially at its heart. It follows the very high moral character of Elwood, who through a bunch of circumstances that are really absolutely heartbreaking, he gets sent to the Nickel School, which is a reform school, and there the school is the stuff of nightmares, quite literally the stuff of my nightmares. And also at this school he meets a friend named Turner, and they go on an adventure while at the school together. I'm not really selling this book very well. Anyways, what I liked about this book is that it was very character driven, and I don't think Whitehead's last novel was very character driven. It was definitely more about the feeling and the theme of the book. But this was all about the character, especially of Elwood, who has these really incredible high moral standards, who's very influenced by Martin Luther King, who is trying his best to do what's right, and yet it kind of ends him up in a lot of pretty awful situations. Colson Whitehead is a master at anticipation. It's like you know that something dark and sinister is lingering around the corner, and you know what's coming, and that feeling of dread that is knotted up in your stomach because you know something horrible is about to happen. Yeah, he does that so well. He does that so well. So in a lot of ways, the book has this momentum to it that you almost like don't want to stop reading. You don't want to put it down. You want to know what's going to happen next. And he was also really good at just these great chapters that encapsulated a single scene, a single idea. So one of them is like a boxing scene, and in that chapter you see it through to the end, through the end of the boxing match. Or there's a time where Elwood goes out of town, and that's what that whole chapter is about. So I really enjoy Colson Whitehead, but because he's so good at building like terror and dread, at least in me, the reader, it's really hard for me to want to pick him up again because I don't love that experience. It's almost the experience of a horror novel. So on the one hand, I'm so glad that I read this book because it did work so much better for me than The Underground Railroad. Thankfully, I didn't suffer from nightmares for 5 days. There was just some truly uncomfortable moments in the book. On the other hand, I know that because he's so good at at building that dread and building that terror, I actually don't really want to read anything else by him. So it's kind of a weird mixed review for me on Colson Whitehead. So if you all have read more of Colson Whitehead and maybe could give me a bit more insight beyond the 2 Pulitzer Prize winning novels that he has written, I would really appreciate that, because I just, I don't know much about his other body of work, but right now I do not feel any desire to pick up anything else by him, truly, because I'm just a scaredy cat. I don't like reading rough stuff. So thank you, Kristin, for reading this book with me. I'm really glad that I had someone to talk to about this, because it was a doozy. My final book that I read with my friend Fraser Simon at the channel Springboard Thought, and this was one of his favorite books, and we read For Love of the Game by Michael Shaara. This is a fairly short book, and it follows Billy Chappell, who is a pitcher, and like a baseball pitcher. He pitches for a baseball team, and he is faced with this decision: do I keep playing the game? Do I keep playing this game of baseball? Or do I let it go and move on to the next stage in my life? And I, very immediately that situation is set up, and you spend the rest of the book understanding what the question means for Billy and why it's such a difficult one for him to make. And boy, this hit a lot of wonderful notes. So on a literary level, let me think, what is it called? So on a literary level, the author, Michael Shaara, does this thing of free and direct speech, which is what Jane Austen does, it's what Edith Wharton does, and a bunch of other authors. And it's when the author is writing in third person, but you're clearly in the perspective of some character in the book. And so you bounce around, you're in Chappell's head, you're in his girlfriend's head sometimes, but you're mostly with Chappell, but it's not done in first person with his thoughts, it's done in third person. And that was really lovely. I really love that technique of writing. I find it really charming, especially if it's done really well, and boy, it was done really, really well. I also love baseball. When I was younger, my younger brother played baseball. I went to baseball games, and so on that level, this book worked for me really well. And then also, this is a book about a character and a character's sort of interior life and struggle, and understanding more about that character. And I love those kinds of books as well. So it really scratched a lot of itches for me. I was really invested in Chappell's struggle to make a choice, and I was really fascinated by, what choice he was going to make. So this was just a lovely read. It was one of those just immediately charming and involved reads, especially for someone who loves baseball like I do. And I just loved it. I just thought it was great. And the reason why this For Love of the Game worked out a bit better than Colson Whitehead's The Nickel Boys is because after reading this, I was like, I actually want to know what Shaara wrote. He is also a Pulitzer Prize winning author. He wrote Pulitzer Prize for The Killer Angels. But I was just like, clearly this is an author that has talent, that has developed his talent, and that I would be really interested in the other things that he wrote. Versus, after reading The Nickel Boys, I was like, I'm not going to read any more Colson Whitehead. So yeah, that's why this is kind of at the top of my list. And yeah, so that is my recent reads for the dudes, the lads, for the last several days, I would say, for the month of September so far. And yeah, that's it from me. So what have you been reading recently? Is there anything that you would like to recommend to me? I'm always open to recommendations. And yeah, that's it. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye, guys.